what's up? So for the past few months, I've been minding my own business on Twitter and everything, but for the life of me, I could not escape from the depravity of what it is that this show has been on the timeline. So for the first little bit of this, of what I heard about this was pretty, regular, typical, just people talking about, their thoughts and feelings about the show and everything. And the next thing I know, I'm just seeing videos of Oliver going down my timeline in the grave. Um, Everything I've learned about Saltburn has been against my will, mind you. Like for weeks, I constantly got online and would just hear stories of behind the scenes of how Oliver, that was his real and everything. Like he didn't want to use prosthetics, and he was just out here pulling out his schmeat to dirt. And honestly, I said, y'all will not disrupt my peace, so I started blocking people. And then I saw a bathtub scene, which I didn't watch all the way, so I had just assumed that it was like a cute little sexy whatever moment between the two of them because I kind of like scrolled out. Imagine my surprise. But yeah, I just heard the girl squawking about it on Twitter, so I said, you know what, let me watch it, and I have thoughts that we can talk about. And also welcome back to my channel. I'm Hayes, and let's get right into this video. Saltburn is a 2023 film that revolves around a character named Oliver who is a little bit of a nerd. Very shy, meek, kind of reserved as a character until we kind of get to know him a little bit more. So yeah, we start off with Oliver talking to an unknown listener about whether or not he loved Felix or not. He says he didn't. I say to the contrary. So we start off with the good year of 2006 with the apple bottom jeans and the boots with the fur. So we see Oliver essentially giving very much the typical shy, meek, reserved kid within a new school archetype, which was a little hard for me to watch just because scenes were hitting a little too close to home for me, and I didn't like that. But I really appreciate how this movie is basically a character-driven story rather than a plot-driven one, because it focuses a lot on Oliver and the context of him engaging in being and his interactions with other people and everything. I think that's really interesting. He's supposed to be around early college age, which I don't And he quickly catches the fancy of Mr. Felix, who is played by Twitter's White Crush of the Month, Jacob Elordi. And we see little bits of their friendship starting to blossom when it comes to certain things, like we see Oliver offering up his bike to Felix whenever he got a flat tire, them meeting for drinks and Felix deciding to pay for Oliver because he was broke, and bonding over family issues. And I must say, a lot of their friendship, especially in the beginning, was kind of done in like this montage kind of form, which I was a little confused about because the pacing was just a little off in the first section of this story. They kind of rushed through, the college years or whatever to kind of, but I guess that's really to, get more into the story, because I think the bulk of the story just takes place within the actual Saltburn. He also meets this really cute boy named Farley, or Farley as the British would call it. They begin to have this cute like frenemies to like lovers dynamic thing that's going on between them, like between competition, like squirting competition a little bit, giving that. I found the dynamic between Oliver and Farley to be the most interesting in the film, to be honest, because of the play of dominance that they were having with each other. I do think it could come off a little over dramatized with Farley a little bit. There wasn't really an established reason why Farley held this initial disdain for Oliver. We got at the beginning of the story during their tutoring sessions together that they had this initial play of dominance where Farley would comment on the terminology of Oliver's papers rather than the substance of his work, which Farley stated both were valid. I do see the setup, but I feel like it wasn't enough to feel like the initial disdain was there. I do get their chemistry together makes sense as the story goes on, but even after that little moment, you'd have moments of Farley staring at him from a distance. I feel like for a good portion, Farley wasn't really even a character that much, and I wish we kind of got more of him, more insights into his thoughts and feelings besides that scene of them during the karaoke night. And I do have more thoughts about Farley, but I'll get into that a little bit later. All we need to know about Farley right now is that he's cute, gay, and he's always standing in the corner off to the side staring at people just like Gia from Euphoria. Yeah, everything seems to be going pretty well. Going in and being friends with Felix has, offered Oliver this ability to feel like he's a part of the popular crowd. You know, his style starts to change a little bit from kind of like nerdy chic to kind of like a little bit more casual. And during some of these scenes, we see some things that about Oliver that kind of are cause for alarm a little bit, but not too much. Just kind of small things like him not being open about his family. But when he did, he eventually trauma dumps onto Felix. After his dad dies, trauma dumping about his father, and you know how his mother was a drug addict, and you know was just not mentally all the way there. He was poor, he was impoverished, he grew up broke, which later on after graduation, by the way, like I said, this whole beginning section story goes by so quickly. Like I swear to God, the movie started with them like going and entering like the first couple of days of college, and then like 5 minutes later, the graduation is already happening. But yeah, there was a lot of foreshadowing as to what would come of Felix and his character and the family and everything. Especially with scenes like when Felix essentially was telling Oliver that after your dad dies, people in my family, we generally write the names of the people who died on stones and then toss them into a river, which Oliver tries, and it ends up landing in a pile of rubbish on the side of the river. So after all of that, Oliver had explained to Felix about his family, his home life, and everything. Felix offers to give up, and it's just like, you know what, come live with me for the summer. I have this place, a castle that you can stay at, and it'll be real fun, type of thing. So Oliver arrives in Saltburn, and let me tell you something. I love set locations. The cinematography and the set, well, it's a mansion's castle, but I just love the use of location in this story. I think the cinematography is beautiful. There's a bunch of shots that I was just like, oh wow, like very interesting, lighting, angles, dynamics, things that they're trying to kind of like pseudo tell within the visuals. And this is where we meet Felix's family. Sir James, Lady Elizabeth, and Venetia, his sister. Also this friend, family, whoever, it doesn't matter, she's not important. Lady Elizabeth is a very interesting character that I kind of want to highlight real quick. The mom character deserves to be in White Lotus. I was looking at her and I was just like, why does she remind me so much of Jennifer Coolidge? And I'm just like, yo, this would be really lit if they are able to cast her, because I think that this role especially fits White Lotus so well. At first, admittedly, I didn't really know how I felt about her. She made me violently uncomfortable, but as the story went on, she actually became one of my favorite characters, and I really actually like her. She has this very surface level vain, attraction to, things that are attractive, pretty, beautiful. Like she hates ugly things. Like she, reiterated that a few times. She essentially uses people and treats, inviting these people over and having them stay. She treats that like, a sort of like charity of like, once you are no longer entertaining to her, you can go. And we saw that with her friend character, whatever. As soon as she found her not interesting or entertaining anymore, she just kind of essentially just kicked her out. And as we see Oliver's character changing throughout the story, we're getting a really interesting view of him. He's becoming very charismatic, very manipulative, and displaying very concerning behaviors. This movie is such a mixture of emotions because it's essentially supposed to be like a romantic dramedy, I think, but it's like a thriller. Like it removes like pretty much the romantic aspect, halfway in. I was talking to my friend and I was just like, yo, watching this movie made me viscerally uncomfortable, and I think that's a good way to describe this movie, is viscerally uncomfortable. We see more and more signs that this family is a little bit off. We see a scene of like Felix, Farley, and Venetia like frolicking butt-ass naked in this field, and Ollie is also having this like pseudo antagonistic sexual tension because like after Oliver pulled down his pants, Farley was like complimenting his cock and balls. And we see more scenes of Oliver slowly slipping himself through the cracks of this family, learning about the history of this family and of this house, essentially to impress the father. And then we get the bathtub scene. So we see a scene of Felix in the bathtub, um, flicking the bean, while Oliver watches him as this man continues to goon in the bathtub, which wouldn't be as bad, but then the scene continued. After Felix leaves the bathroom, we get a scene of Oliver getting into the tub, getting on all fours, pressing his face into the draining bathwater, and starts slurping. He starts slurping the bathwater semen puree from the drain of the tub. This movie has a tendency to really linger in on uncomfortable scenes very purposefully, and I actually really like when movies and shows are able to do this effectively by lingering in on something, removing the soundtrack, just letting us sit and fester in the awkwardness and the uncomfortableness and the silence of what is happening on screen, and then letting it linger for a long ass time. I actually really like when things do that. This was very effective. Shawty, I drink your bath water. I just know it was creamy. Anyways, we get more scenes of Oliver becoming more and more comfortable within the house, interacting with the people. We get this scene with him and Elizabeth where he's essentially bad mouthing her friend, cousin, whoever, and was essentially just like, oh, she was a weird one. She was probably doing it for attention, she was just trying to, yada yada. Essentially telling the mom character what it is that she wanted to hear, which is a very interesting thing that we get with this character, of him constantly being very perceptive enough to learn things about people, learn what they like, they don't like, is very attentive and very perceptive of that, and thereby using those things in order to manipulate people. And this was the scene in the movie where I said, oh, we're watching a psychopath developing. I don't know why that was the scene that ticked me off, and not the bathtub scene that literally happened right before I said I do not see it. So then we start seeing the relationship between Oliver and Venetia developing. Venetia seems to have this really interesting fascination, as we'll say, towards Oliver, continuously standing out in front of his window at night, at one point in sheer see-through clothing. And the shy and meek Oliver responds by coming up to her and completely dominating her, turning into what Mr. Gray wishes he could be. Like, it's giving good girl, open your mouth. Completely manipulating and flirting with her, and then eventually goes down on her. And she's like, oh, it's not the right time, I'm on my period essentially. And he said, what that got to do with me? He calls himself a vampire while eating her out in full view of the courtyard and anyone who has their window open, which Farley does, and he sees what's happening. So obviously he goes and tells Felix, who the next day they have this awkward, situation going on, and, eventually Oliver, quells Felix's concerns by lying and manipulating, and eventually essentially passing the blame on to Farley, say, oh, he's just making shit up. But I'll get into this when it comes to the character of Farley. I didn't really like how they were doing his character for the longest time, because even though he was like the first person that we met, really, like, of the main cast besides obviously Oliver, he was the first person that we met, and yet for like the longest time he was really kind of relegated to the sidelines. Like I said, just like sitting and staring at people, specifically Oliver, whenever they needed to have someone like brutishly stare at him. And honestly, me personally, I think they should have done more with this character. I found Farley's character really interesting because he was one of the few people who actually, even though he eventually lost and won at the same time, in the end to Oliver, he was one of the few people that was actually challenging him and actually, like putting up a fight, in any sort of way. So I just kind of wish that we got a little bit more with Farley. But I can get into that later too. And we get more scenes of Oliver and Farley and this prominent antagonistic sexual tension that they have. Farley sets up this karaoke where he essentially embarrasses and humiliates Oliver by kind of like playing a song that forces him to, sing lyrics like, "Oh, I'm needing you guys to pay my rent." Essentially calling him a freeloader, right? And after feeling embarrassed, Oliver goes into Farley's room at night, grabs his cock, and tells him to behave like the good little slut he is. I'm sorry. Essentially dominating Farley and giving him a hand job. And then the next morning, Farley is swiftly kicked out of the house due to like idea of him possibly like going to an art collector or whatever and like like planning to sell their like family's art pieces or whatever. So they swiftly kick him the hell out. We then see Felix for Oliver's birthday. He plans a trip to kind of surprise him with going to visit his mom, the strained relationship that he said that he had with his mom and everything. Which we then see that not only is his mother very much sober, but we also see that his father is very much alive, and Oliver is very much a dirty liar. He lied about not having siblings, he lied about his family conditions, he's not poor, he's like middle class. His family life seemed pretty good, despite what he said about it. Even lying to his parents about being like the top of his class or something like that, which Felix, upon discovering this information, was just like, oh yeah, really? Oh, he was at the top of his class. Oh, his siblings that he told me he didn't have? Oh yeah. Messy. And obviously Felix has a problem with this. They sit, in silence on the ride home, in awkward silence, and then we get that scene of Felix essentially saying, after this party that, my parents are throwing for you, I think it's best that you leave. And Oliver's like, oh, well, can we still be friends? And he's just like, it's not looking likely, love. Which sends Oliver into a spiral. And it was a combination of this, him essentially later on in the party telling Oliver to fuck off, and a combination of Farley coming out of, the woodworks out of nowhere to essentially be like, you're done, sweetheart. This life that you're trying to live in your head, this is all fantasy for you. This is something that you tell your children about in the future, about this grand, cute summer that you have. But me personally, this is my life. This is my family. I live here. This is the lifestyle that I am in, and you are nothing of the sort. So don't ever forget that. A little slap on the cheek. If I'm being honest, I really thought Farley was about to die right then and there. I would not have been surprised, but yeah, Oliver essentially follows Felix into this maze thing, because he's essentially stalking him, like take a girl out to go bang her. And in one last attempt, he tries to essentially, tell him, oh, I thought this is what you wanted, and I love, like, he confesses his love to him finally. It's a bit too fucking late, mate, but he confesses his feelings, and it's just like, like, I never wanted to hurt you kind of thing. And Felix tells him, I don't even know how to feel about you anymore. You make my blood run cold. To which Oliver hands him his bottle, tells him that he doesn't care what he thinks about him anymore, and then walks away. So imagine everyone's surprised when they wake up the next morning and Felix is dead. And might I say, this next scene, the lunch scene, actually might be my favorite scene in the movie, because it's so well done, of like the family trying, especially the mother and father, trying to essentially pretend like everything is normal. And that's a common thing that they did throughout this movie. Like after like some weird things would happen, the mother, especially the mother, would come out and be like, oh, it was a lovely day, isn't it? The weather's great, type of. So, but I love how, even though the mother and father are trying their hardest to like try to keep casual conversation and be like, oh, the party that we threw last night was great, it went off without a hitch type of shit. And Farley, Venetia are just sitting there and they're just like in shock and awe, just like, what the hell is happening? Like, They're just sitting there in silence, but you can also tell with the parents, you can obviously tell that they're coping and that they're trying not to think about it, and like you can see that they're suffering inside, but they're just trying to cope with it any way that they can. Um, the part of the scene where they came in and was just had to close the curtain because the coroner's ambulance thing was coming to go scoop up the dead body. I'm sorry. And after they close the curtains, we just get this like very uncomfortable scene where we sit in near silence as like the family is shrouded in like this red shadowy light, and like everyone's like freaking out. They're hearing and seeing like the coroner's ambulance come up, and they know what that means. And the sister's freaking out. She's over here trying to pour wine and is like spilling it everywhere because she just so lost in the emotions and everything. And what's Oliver doing? Munching. He's munching on lunch, and it's just like, well, this was a lovely dinner. Thank you so much to the mother. Of course, this pisses, what's his name? Farley. It pisses Farley off. And he's just like, what are you still doing here? Like, why? How are all of you trying to carry on? This is normal? Like, why are you still here, Oliver? And Oliver pulls an Uno reverse and is just like, I wouldn't be talking too much because of the drugs that y'all were taking last night, which is correct. But the fact that he managed to flip that situation onto Farley and get him kicked out of the house and completely separated, mind-boggling. And that's kind of like where we leave Farley's character. I really think that we should have gotten a little bit more closure on that. I mean, I'm glad that he left now before everyone started fucking dying, but like, I don't know, it just feels a little empty. It feels like that character had like a little bit more left to do. I don't know. After that, we get the next scene of Felix's funeral, and we get the scene of Felix's funeral, and rain still dripping, moist, the dirt's still moist, and what Oliver proceeds to do is have a whole breakdown over this man's grave, and then he proceeds to stick his dick in there into the dirt and starts fucking the grave. That's not funny. That's not funny. It's not. I'm betting you $10 that he actually finished in that grave. Where was everybody else at? The funeral service had literally just ended. There was nobody that saw that. And then we get another bathtub scene, which is never a good thing in this movie. But this time, Venetia's in the bathtub, and she essentially calls Oliver all the way out. In the bathtub, she says that her father compares Oliver to a spider, you know, weaving his web and everything, but she compares him to a moth, you know, very soft, quiet, you know, attracted to shiny, bright objects and things, slowly creeping its way in, eventually eating the family from the inside out, leaving holes of destruction in his wake. Just having a full-blown episode with everything that was happening, the anger, the angst, the sadness, the grief, and everything, which eventually ends up killing herself. She unfortunately passed away. So after his daughter died, the father's just like, you know, you gotta go. Like, you have this unhealthy attachment to my wife, you know, she also has that with you. I think it's best that you leave. And eventually, we assume pays him to tell him to get and everything, but we don't really get confirmation on if he actually got paid or not. We're almost done, y'all. We're almost done. So years pass now at this point, and the father of the estate ends up dead. I'm guessing from natural causes or whatever. And Oliver just conveniently happens to be in the same cafe to run into the mom. They rekindle, you know, whatever they had going for them. And she invites him to stay over. And like a dumbass, she signs over papers saying that he will become the heir of this estate after she dies. And at several points in this movie, we get a shot of Oliver, I guess what would be the present day at that point, and talking to someone that we don't know. So we finally know who it is that he's talking to, and come to find out it's Elizabeth, who is on her deathbed with a breathing tube shoved down her throat, and he's over here just talking the most shit. But yeah, he confesses to everything essentially. Him killing Felix, him putting the blades by Venetia's bathtub so that she does the thing, and purposefully drove down Elizabeth's health. He goes on this long monologue about how, the rich versus the working people, and these people never had to work, and they don't know what work is, and they're allowed to have accidents and do things, but the working class people don't get that opportunity. Okay. And while he's talking about this, we get a little montage of like scenes that shows how deep he was into planning at least some aspects of this out. We see that the reason why Felix had a flat tire is because Oliver put a nail in it purposefully so that he can meet Felix, faking like he was broke in order to garner sympathy from Felix. He's such a play the long game with these people. He then finishes his plan by ripping out the breathing tube of Elizabeth, and she dies. But as we see, after she's dead, he like kind of essentially forces her arms around him in like a hugging manner, showing that this man is still obviously disturbed and is still longing for that reprieve from loneliness. He wants to have that affection, but I don't get, it seems like he had that, with his actual parents. Maybe he just wanted it from those people, or he was just lonely for like a large portion of his life, so he just didn't, feel like he got that from other people, or the people that he was like wanting to. And the last scene of the movie that we get is Oliver with his cock and balls out again, dancing to music in their foyer. And like, first of all, he grabbed, remember how Felix said that his entire family would like put their names on stones when they die, and like it would be something. This man grabbed all those stones and then put them on this like puppet theater thing with like 4 different puppets, essentially showing that like he was been masterminding this whole thing and essentially led to these 4 people dying. Like, this man really like got in his bag and managed to get a whole estate, a castle in the end. End of movie. I think part of this shows like the all-consuming power of power and money and everything, and like once I think he got a taste of that lifestyle, that kind of thing, he was just like, you people don't deserve it, but I do. But more interesting, I really like how this was essentially a character study showing the making of a psychopath and a serial killer. Now, I don't know enough about psychology to, diagnose people or anything like that, but from what I've gathered and the traits that he exhibited on screen kind of leans into that a little bit. He's cold and calculating, unempathetic, using intelligence and charisma to get what he wants, and lying for his own personal gain. He had this suave way about going about his like manipulation tactics and being very open, very cold, calculating, perceptive. His perception was very like bordering on creepy, but he was able to do that. He was able to use his perception abilities to essentially learn how to properly manipulate people, which I think is a very interesting character study, especially despite all the things that like were going pretty well in his life. He was pretty well off. His family, weren't struggling. Both parents alive, both parents love him, both parents care. Like, pretty much lied about most of the trauma that went on in his life, and yet he still craved that love and affection from someone who was unattainable. Which I think it was a very interesting way to end the movie, with him kind of like being like, yeah, I won. But I was sitting here and I was thinking, when there wasn't cock and balls in my face, that you're gonna get lonely. Like, that was a prominent point of your character, like the loneliness aspect of it. So like, after you've pretty much murked everyone that had ties to you or cared about you in any way, Like, yeah, you have this big, estate, castle thing or whatever, but where does that leave you? With nothing but materialistic items. So I think it would be interesting. It would have been interesting to explore that a little bit. I guess they did with like the whole like him forcing the mom to hug him after she died and everything. I do wish they could have done it a little bit more, though. I think that would have been really good. Way to show like at the end of this, I did all of this, and now I have what I want. But is it really what I want, kind of thing? And in the end, I really find it interesting how this dude who was so good at manipulating, being very charismatic, very dominating, being coming off as very self-assured. In fact, being able to do that with everyone except the main person that he actually cared about. The one person, Felix, that he actually cared about and actually, like felt something towards. There were several moments that showed him being meek and submissive, for lack of better words. Like he purposefully, like, especially that one thing, because there were several points where Felix was playing the muff, and like there were like times where he was like wanting to like approach, and mind you, this was right after him having this dominating personality when it comes to Venetia, and he can't have any of that with Felix. He can't be open and honest with him. He can't be direct with him. And I think that's such a fascinating character dynamic. But the ending, it can really depend on how you feel about Oliver as a character, how much you would enjoy this ending. Now, I'm not particularly the biggest fan of characters that are low-key terrible people getting their happy ending, especially without adequate consequences or development beforehand. And we had that scene of him still craving that connection with others and feeling lonely at the end with the hospital scene, but I feel like we could have got a little bit more with that. And we had that scene of him still craving that connection with others and feeling lonely at the end with the hospital scene, but I feel like we could have got a little bit more with that. And I absolutely love the cinematography of this movie. There are several shots that are not only beautiful and stunning, but that also show Oliver's character. There's a lot of imagery with reflections and mirrors and everything, as we see Oliver getting moments where you see his reflection staring directly into the camera, kind of showing the different aspects of his personality. But yeah, overall, I think this is a very interesting watch. It was a very interesting movie. It was a movie. Honestly, I've kind of seen worse, which is really the the gag of it all. That's pretty much my thoughts that I have on Saltburn. After I was forced to watch it against my will because of Twitter. Yes, that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching, if you indeed still are, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.